Hey, it's Spence from LaunchFlows.com. In this video, I'm going to show you how we actually converted the homepage of LaunchFlows from an Elementor setup to a purely Gutenberg setup. And the reason I want to make this video, and it's going to be part of what I'm doing at WPLaunchKit as well, is to demonstrate that the tools of Gutenberg now provide a way for anybody, whether you're using Elementor or Divi or other page builders, to actually start using the native tools of WordPress. In this example, I happen to be using the free Kadence theme along with the free Kadence blocks, but you could use virtually any of the free block sets, including Spectra. You could use GeneratePress. I think Kadence has a nice setup, and I also like the style of their defaults, so I'm just using that here. Now, the reason that I did this primarily was, well, twofold. First of all, to demonstrate that this is really, in my opinion, the future of WordPress, is to use a native themes, the ones that are old-fashioned in the way that they've still got the customizer and they've still got basically all the options for you versus full-site editing. And number two is that instead of having to resort to using a third-party page builder that has an entire extra layer, that it's actually more efficient and in many ways a better experience to just go with what's here. And that is to use the native editor, which is Gutenberg. Now, the benefit of this is I'm going to be sharing with you not only what I did on the back end, just to give you some tips, but also to take this, and I'm going to be sharing this over in the patterns.launchflows library, as well as being part of what we're offering over at WPLaunchKit. So this is more than I want to explain in this particular video, but WPLaunchKit is a business where I'm going to be basically doing two main things. One is to be asking everybody to join the list, where every week, 4 times a month, we're going to be displaying the plugins and the other services that you would be using, both the free ones and the premiums, for building out a modern WordPress site. But instead of just showing you those things, we're actually going to be including fully working solutions in the form of one-click demos. And that will form the basis for you or your clients to not only be inspired and informed, but also to just click and get what it is that we're doing, so that you can see the plugins interacting as part of WordPress as a solution. Whereas right now what happens is the plugins tend to be demonstrated or shown in a sort of vacuum, without actual context of what they do with the other things that you would be using. And the benefit of this is that it comes along with the idea that you can also have a free call or a paid consultation, or you can even acquire a complete kit of everything that's in the Launch Kit. So there's a benefit for everybody in the ecosystem, whether you use our free examples or lessons, whether you go with a pro kind of a package or plan where you've gotten the components you need all in one purchase, or whether you actually take advantage of the free or the paid consultation. This allows you or your clients to achieve essentially the kind of outcomes that WordPress really could be doing or should have been doing for some time, but they require a lot of cutting through the ecosystem, right? Like if you had dropped into a flea market and were expected on your own to figure out how to buy all the pieces of everything you need for a business, versus a typical experience where, you go to a specialist and walk in the door and they've got the thing you need and the expertise you need. And that's what we've really been trying to do here, personally myself for 16 years, but in the last couple of years at WPLaunchify, LaunchFlows, and so forth. All right, so on with what I want to demonstrate for you. This is the original LaunchFlows page that I built, when I started in 2019. It has changed slightly. It was built with Elementor because at the time that was what was available. And it's evolved in terms of the copywriting, but the most important thing is there's really basic components here. First of all, it's pretty static. It has the call to action above the fold, which is either a demo or get the product. It really doesn't have much in the way of mechanics other than when you click buy now, it will scroll you down to our pricing options, which is also a simple grid. The only other specialized component was this before and after slider, which was an add-on for Elementor. But as you'll see, here is the new page done entirely in native Gutenberg. And I'm going to do the back end on this. So we've got the same call to action. All of the literal, almost pixel by pixel visuals are the same because I just essentially modeled them in Gutenberg from what we had done in Elementor. The other component that I was just demonstrating with the slider, I'm using a free plugin here, which is the before and after plugin, available in the repository, not even a paid premium plugin. There are one or two examples where I actually put a few snippets of CSS in, and I did that not because you couldn't find a block, but rather I'm already proficient in CSS, and one of the things I'm going to share with you and show you as part of going forward with LaunchKit and LaunchFlows and these ready-to-go demos and such is that sometimes it's just better to learn a couple snippets of CSS and pop it into your layout or your pattern, because this kind of thing is literally one line of CSS. The pricing table here is pretty much the similar or same. I did do a couple changes when I put it in the tablet responsive mode, but that was just a design choice. So let's talk about how I achieve this. The biggest question I get asked all the time is, well, what theme do I need to use versus, you know, one of the kind of hybrid things like Elementor. You know, Elementor and Divi aren't just a page builder and they're not just a theme. They're kind of both. Technically speaking, you can use Elementor with any page builder you want. Many people use their native one, or they use it in combination with something else like Buddy Boss, or in my case, I was using it here with Kadence as the theme. Divi is a little closer to kind of a hybrid because yes, technically there is a plugin, but really if you use Divi, you're using everything Divi. With Gutenberg, what's nice is you can choose any hybrid combination you want. So here using Kadence, I basically set up a page, and you'll notice that in this case, I'm on new home versus the original, which is just the root URL for the moment. Here, because I was using Kadence, I was able to do a couple things. First of all, I disabled the normal header elements that give you the sort of name of the page and the spacing that goes with that. I also chose a full width layout because I wanted to have the entire width of the canvas to emulate the design components here, which obviously go edge to edge, but the container inside is limited to 1250 pixels. So by using full width, that gave me the full width of the page to work with. And the rest of the stuff I left alone. Now, because I'm using the Kadence blocks, I also have some other color palette choices, which I set up just by adding in my own default colors from the original setup I had. You can, if you want, also conform or customize each of the defaults of all these various blocks, but admittedly, I don't bother to do that. I just sort of set up the blocks as I go and then copy and duplicate them. One of the things I did do here, which again is an interesting choice, and it depends on what you want to do. If you have some custom CSS or JavaScript, one of the nice things with the Kadence blocks is you get this page scripts area, and you can just put the CSS in here, which is what I did for the time being. But what I would ultimately do is I'm going to move this from this particular page and I will put it into my child theme CSS, which is a better place to put all of your changes. If you do it on a page by page basis, which is sometimes useful for either diagnostic or for building stuff, you run the risk of forgetting where you left all of your stuff. It's kind of like the metaphor of having a file cabinet where you have too many drawers or too many folders with folders inside. But it is very convenient when you're building out the solution to use this ability, right? I can have separate footer, body, head, or in this case, CSS that applies only to this page. And that way I can just be as specific as I need to be. We'll talk about the CSS in a minute. Some of you might have already picked up, I've got this weird block of script here. Now here I was using an HTML block because I actually am hosting a video through Wistia. And while you can use YouTube and Vimeo and other hosting services like bunny.net, and you can use Presto Player and some other embed plugins, I actually already had Wistia and I had an account that has these nice embed codes that have a lot of information they'll carry forward to my account about views and watching and all the rest. So even though it looks a little weird, it's just basically like using any other video embed block, except it just doesn't really preview it when I'm in HTML mode. I could switch to that mode if I wanted to, if it makes you feel better. I just like to do it this way, and Wistia provides that as part of their service. I can't say that you have to use Wistia. I don't actually use it for much anymore. I usually use either Vimeo or YouTube or BunnyNet. Okay, let's talk about how I actually do this procedure and what are some of the tricks. Admittedly, Gutenberg still has a lot to be desired in the preview mode here. I would say on a scale of 1 to 10, the current state of affairs as of October 2022 is this is about a 6 versus something like an Elementor or a Divi. And that is to say, you just cannot rely on what you see as what you get in preview mode on the back end. It's just not going to happen. So what I do instead is I would work with the front end and the back end in two separate tabs, typically side by side. And then I would basically make a change, update, and then go over and look at the results on the front end. I would just literally go this, 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 and so forth. So please don't rely on like literally that it's going to be pixel by pixel. You can even see here, because again, there's some things that I customized that the images don't show the CSS and the spacing is just slightly different for a lot of the components, okay? Nevertheless, it's quite nice. In fact, my preference to be working natively right here versus having to have an entirely separate builder layer open in Elementor. I find it's much faster, much more reliable, and allows me to do some of the things I'm going to show you. I always use list view. So I click this tab here, and you'll notice this is now default in WordPress 6.1, but even before that it was available. I always set up my sections, in this case. The naming convention is like weird, but instead of calling these rows, the outer ones are called sections in Kadence, and then inside is called a row. Kind of seems backwards to me, but Ben Rittner would be able to answer why he named it that way. Nevertheless, each of these kind of horizontal things is a section, and this is one of the ways that I found for sales pages you can get a lot of reusability. In fact, that's one of the benefits of me showing you and sharing this with you. You could literally grab any of these and just restack them for whatever you want to do. And that's what I do all the time as well. I can use these on the same website or other websites because all the little nuanced stuff is already fit in place. So you can just kind of now take the model and replace it with your own stuff. Now, I've also used the advanced capability to label these things. So if you scroll down, you have to be in the actual page setup. So click on the settings, go to page, and then scroll down on the right side. I take it back. You have to be in the block setting. So let's select a block, like the section here. All right. Then be in the block area, scroll down to advanced. And here I make use of naming each of these sections. You'll notice above the fold, instant, bumps, whatever, get started. And that helps me understand where I want to go for navigation. In a previous version of WordPress, this was always annoying because it was really impossible to know not only where you were, but you couldn't do what I'm going to do now, which is when you click, this will take me to the actual section. And that's very similar to what Elementor and Divi have and so forth. So this makes it a piece of cake to just stack up your pre-made sections and then just go and make tweaks to them. As a general rule, when I'm using Kadence, I start with a section and then I immediately put one or more rows into it. So you'll notice that in this particular case, we've got the first row is what gives me the top components. And that is, you can kind of see that the second row, if I click on it, is just the works with Elementor bit below. They kind of overlap a little. So here, see how that's highlighted in blue? And above is the row. So I have a few nested things in here. The two top sections in the top row are for the left column and the right column. And you'll notice I'm not going to change my design, but you'll notice I have the grab handle, so I can either manually drag it or I could change the layout here to a predefined ratio. I can also change the gutter, which is the space between these. I have a standard one here, but you might go to, much wider. There's a lot of nuanced things that I'll talk about in a second, but in general, by starting with the outside shell and then putting in the row layout, I've got the basis for what I want. But nesting is very important. So watch what happens here. When I go to the first section, which is the left section, you'll notice I've got the advanced text, which is, I made it for my H1 headline. Then I've got the subtext, which I made here as an H4, I believe. Then I've got a nested row, and I did that so that I can put my buttons in place. And the reason is because the row layout gives me the ability to do a 2-column layout. And that's how I achieved the ability to put a button in each of these sections and then make each of those buttons the size and shape that I want. Not the least of which is that if I go to button settings, I customized it so that I am, first of all, with extra padding to make them kind of fat and chunky. I did full width, which is really nice because I just filled the whole space. I also set that gutter. Remember we talked about the gutter. I set the gutter for the row layout so that it was, you know, skinny, 10 pixels here, because I don't want too much space between them. And then finally, I was able to set up each button with the unique color scheme and everything else just using the advanced button controls. And I think that the Kadence button controls are quite nice. So you can go here, for example, like the default style or the theme style, and then you can just go ahead and customize things like the colors. Once you set this up, you can always save these buttons and reuse them, or you can save the whole section. So I haven't done that here, but for example, if I wanted to save this sort of for future use, I would just click here, and then I might save it to my reusable blocks, or I could save it as a pattern. Whichever way you want to do it, it's nice to have it because you can then just reuse that in your same design or somewhere else on your site. Let's talk about the padding and the margin. Now, one of the things that's sort of in the mature to come stage, it's in the immature stage, is that when you're doing responsive layouts, there are the options here, right? So desktop, tablet, and mobile. You have to choose only one form of padding or margin. I guess you could say sizing. I don't know what the term is. I'm at a loss for words. I'll show what I mean. So for example, if we look at the sections, I need something above and below this. So I click on this section, and over here under padding and margin, I don't have anything. And the reason for that is because I want these to be kind of agnostic containers. I want them to go essentially full width. I want them to just fill the whole space. So I really don't want to do much to that other than to say fill the whole space. It's in the row layouts that I force what's my choice about the content inside. And so when I click on row layout, first of all, you can see that I have a padding choice, and the padding is for the top and the bottom. That's what gives us a nice, you know, just enough breathing room above and below so that this thing isn't just literally filling up right to the words. But you notice this little nice overlap I have with the images. I did that with some CSS, but the reason I wanted to be very specific about the padding above and below is because I need to use the same unit. That's the word I was looking for. So notice I chose percentages. And this is important because in Elementor, I'm almost 100% sure, you can have in, let's say, desktop mode, you could be using percentages, and then you could go to, let's say, mobile mode, and you can use pixels or vice versa. Whereas in Kadence, at least for now, you have to choose just one unit and stick with it. So in this case, there's this nice setup, mobile margin padding. Notice it's in percentage. I have different values here, but you can't apparently switch between using percentages for mobile and pixels for the main. So I just decided to go with percentages because it gave me a nice ratio and it just happened to work out. So by using the row as sort of the thing that gives you the breathing room and the layout and everything else inside, you free yourself up from having to be hunting around too much for where are all your changes. The other thing that's nice about that is you can stack a bunch of sections. So you'll notice here, besides the fact that they're just kind of filling side to side, notice I have these alternating color patterns. I have sort of the gray color, then white, then gray, then white, then gray. So you can just make, and you can even add another class to it if you wanted, or an ID. You could just stack up like one of each color and then just duplicate them, right? Like gray, white, gray, white, gray, white, gray, white, and then go ahead and fill in the rest of the details of what goes inside, starting with a row. Let's talk about how I achieved some of the custom stuff with regard to like the images. As far as I can tell, there is not an option to do a translation or a rotation of an image. Now, maybe I'm wrong, and maybe it exists somewhere, and certainly somebody could maybe find it. No, these are extras that aren't even from Kadence. These are from Elementor, Gutenberg Plus, which quite frankly, I don't even know I have in the demo because I'm not using them at the moment. But there doesn't seem to be much else in the way of control that it would allow me to achieve the effect I wanted. So that's where I just chose to use a nice little snippet of CSS. And I'll show you what that is. And I'm just checking because I was looking at this before in case I happen to be wrong. I just honestly do not see anything that gives me that rotational capability and so forth, which, by the way, is not surprising. It's an advanced feature, and it's something that would maybe come from a specialty block, or maybe it's actually in one of the pro blocks from Kadence. I just didn't bother looking for it. Here's what I did instead. With any browser, Chrome or Safari, Firefox, right-click and turn on your inspector. And here, I'll just show you what I did. I'll move it up a bit here. So I created two unique classes. And again, this is not designed to be a CSS tutorial, but a class is a naming convention. You have IDs and you have classes. Classes are sort of like adjectives. They're very descriptive, and they can be used very specifically because you could just make a million of them. IDs tend to be like nouns. They're very structural, and they're very reusable. So you would have IDs would typically be things that are very specific to one item or more, and you can use classes to just repeat again and again and again and again. That's just kind of general way to say it. So I made a class for rotate image left and rotate image right. And here's the class I wrote out. It's called rotate-left. And then I applied it to the image. And when I use my inspector tool and I roll my mouse over, you can see that I'm essentially choosing the image that's inside of that Gutenberg block. And here's the thing that makes the rotation. It's a CSS instruction or rule called rotate. And for the left one, I rotated -5 degrees. But I also used the CSS instruction or rule for translate. And in that case, that's what moved the item from being too far outside the left to more in line. So watch what happens. When I turn it off, see how it shifts over to the left? And I didn't want that to happen. I want it to be fit in. Same thing with the rotation. See how it's rotating? Okay. And I also did a Z index of 2, and that meant that it would be above the base. The base of this design is by default at presumably 0. By having it at 2, it means it's going to always be on top, kind of like it's the piece of paper you put on top of everything on your desktop. Now I added some other things, including I adjusted the filter for brightness, and I put some nice radius on the border. And when I turn it on and off, you can kind of see how that goes to square. Box shadow really makes it pop. And then I also adjusted the top margin because, see, I wanted to go negative. Notice right here, I wanted to make sure that it just gave it that 3D dimensionality so that it appears that it's like skeuomorphic, almost like the original stuff on the iPhone. And I did that with the right-hand design. The difference is that I rotated right 5 degrees instead of -5 degrees. When I did these in mobile, I did the same thing, but I had to adjust the rule slightly for responsive. And again, this is not a CSS tutorial. I'll cover this in other videos, but the CSS rules, I just created the main rule for rotating image left and the sort of same thing for the right with all the information. But then I made 2 responsive rules. One was for mobile. This is maximum width of up to 767 pixels. And here I said, I need the translation to be slightly different. I only want it to move 40 pixels from the left side instead of 120. And I only want on the right side virtually no movement because it's already far enough over there. Now, you can tweak these as you need for your layout and your images. I did another rule very similar for tablet that said max width of up to 1024. Notice I put the rules in this order. So the first rule is the main rule with everything. Then I modify that with the mobile, and I modify that for tablet. So the idea is I basically create a situation where the last rule will trump the rule before it as long as the screen size matches. We'll talk about responsive stuff in another video. The slider, I'll talk about in a second, the plugin looked pretty good, but I wanted to customize it to look more like the Elementor slider. So this other CSS really just customizes the look and the feel of the slider and the slider handle. That's basically all it does. And then finally, this last CSS was that simple 1 or 2 lines I was telling you about how if you roll over this one block, notice how it has this nice scaling. It translates into a scale of 1.1, but it eases into it. And that's what these 2 lines are. Scale to 1.1 when you hover on the image. And the transition is 300 milliseconds, and it, changes the opacity slightly to make it look like it's graceful. So there's really only a couple rules I made. There's that scaling, there's the customize the slider handle, and then there was the rotating of the images. This one for the H4 was maybe my being lazy. I don't probably need that rule. I'll take that out because I use the controls of Kadence ultimately for that. And then this was just to suppress temporarily the header that normally comes from Elementor, because I've yet to disable Elementor. I want to kind of wrap up this tutorial by saying I actually am disabling and removing Elementor. That's the whole point of this. I've done all the other pages on LaunchFlows now natively in Gutenberg, including one of the ones that was really, I'd say, one of the best examples of how far you can go with just the stack of stuff that we show you using LaunchFlows, WooCommerce, using a simple, stack of blocks and WP Fusion, Fluent CRM. We did our entire AppSumo and we sold thousands of customers with this automated checkout page. And what's really neat about this is that this is something that the folks at AppSumo said, we've never seen anybody implement this so fast and get it right the first time. And yet this is really, really ridiculous. I'll show you how quickly this was set up. This is something that I already share in the patterns library. It's just a simple matter of having, 3 redeemable codes that match up with various products. And each of the code buttons that lets somebody load them are using marketing automation with tags. So if somebody has not yet redeemed the code, this one shows and the other ones don't. They put in their first code, they get the product, they redeem it. It shows this new button that lets them know they've got it. And now the second button shows. And as you do that, all the visibility is controlled through the conditional displays. And that's using, actually it's through the couple things. First of all, it's using conditional blocks, and it's also using, let's click on this. It's using visibility, WP Fusion, and you'll notice that we've got tags, right? So in order to see the first button, you can't have it redeemed any of the products. But as you go through, let's say we go to the second product, the visibility changes slightly. And now, you need to have purchased the first thing, but not have purchased the second and the third thing, and so forth. But the idea is all of these things end up as patterns. And because they're in as patterns, now you can just copy and paste them and use them on your own site. But more importantly, with WPLaunchKit, you'll actually be able to get these as ready-to-use demos. In other words, everything you see for what I've got at LaunchFlows or Launch Club or any of the other exciting demos that we're doing and showing in the newsletter will be available for you to use for free for 2 hours. And in many cases, they'll be available for you to just essentially use for a client. Plus, they'll have myself and my team available for starting with a free consultation and or going into just get the hours, get the kit, get everything you need, plus a discount on all the plugins that are necessary from the original authors, probably at a significant discount, all in one box. And if you don't have somebody on your team, we also have relationships with folks that can help you as the manager of the project, in addition to our own expertise for doing the things like content and design. All right, so that's kind of the wrap up here. You can look forward to seeing this new page actually live, and I'm actually going to share our own page, our own setup as part of the free pattern library over at LaunchFlows in the patterns.launchflows so that everybody can benefit from this. And in doing so, I think that you'll see that this is a system that makes WordPress the way it should have always been, which is like a platform that has features instead of a flea market where everybody's competing to sell you stuff that doesn't necessarily work together. This entire stack of stuff is something that is probably $600 to $800 of plugins a year to run the entire business, like under $100 a month for the software. And then the stack of stuff can come in the form, as I say, of you just taking the free patterns, or you taking the ready-to-go demos, or you taking the help and everything in a package and just changing out the logos, changing out the copy, changing out the design. And instead of reinventing the wheel, you've got the mechanical ready to go solution you need with the expertise that goes along with it in no time. Finally, I want to address that one of the things I'm going to be doing here, in addition, is I'm going to be providing sort of micro solutions out of this. So many of the things that you see in a full-blown site like LaunchFlows or WPLaunchify or one of our other products, many people don't need all of that. Many people just need a one-page checkout. Maybe you need a competitor to Gumroad. Maybe you need something that's like an index of personnel. Maybe you need something that is, a calendar for events that you need to sell or your clients do. One of the things that I can now offer through LaunchKit and the rest of the tools that we built over these many years is the way to say, hey, for free, here's what you can sell to somebody and earn yourself $300, $600, $1,200. If you want to take it up a notch and actually get our help and involvement or get the pro stuff, you might be able to just go ahead and bring in a client. We have a conversation with you and your client, and we make it where you can actually, convert that into a $1,000, $2,500, $5,000 project, because we can deliver the kind of stuff you need to get the job done, as well as make you look like a real, a hero to the client, because that's ultimately what it's about. It's collaborative, it's helpful. We should all be working towards the same goal because there's plenty of potential work to go around instead of us all competing against each other. So these are the things I'm going to be demonstrating. Even if you have zero budget, you can learn and earn. If you have a budget or you have clients that have a budget, you can save time and make more profit by collaborating. And we can all move forward in WordPress as a platform instead of as this, again, competitive flea market with very little top-down leadership, which is, I think, not necessarily, I want to use the unfortunate thing, but that's the problem that I aim to solve with all of this is we can complain and whine and kick and scream, or we can just do something about it. And this is my way of doing something about it that's completely democratic, because there's nothing I'm holding back from anybody, but there's a lot that I have available to those who want to participate in a collaborative way, whether you're making the software and you need it featured and demoed, whether you're an agency or a freelancer and you want to earn and learn how, or whether you're somebody that is, essentially in the hosting business and you're looking for exciting ways to get more companies and more customers to actually use your hosting. By working with us over here, we can give you products and services and a newsletter and other information that's exciting and innovative, and you just get it in a brand, a white label branded bespoke way for your particular hosting company and differentiate yourself from what the other companies may be doing in some way. All right, this is Spence. I look forward to seeing you on the next video.